you have a country that is really kind of a foothold for China and Russia, and they're doing a lot of illegal activity, a lot of criminal activity, and they've basically become a criminal state.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Elaad Eliahu, the White House correspondent for Timcast, but today we have a very special episode because we are in Congress and we are interviewing different Republican congressmen. And today we have Eric Burlison from Missouri taking time to interview with us. Thank you so much for taking the time. I wanted to hop in quickly because I know we are short on time. It's one of the most pressing issues that I believe the White House is dealing with, and that is I don't know if to call it a conflict or fighting drug smuggling outside of Venezuela.
Yeah.
I guess we'll start with, what do you think so far of what the administration's actions outside of Venezuelan waters have been so far?
Yeah, I think that the priority should be not necessarily just regime change for the sake of regime change, because we've seen that play out before, right? The Taliban, for example, now control Afghanistan. If you don't fix the core problems, then you're going to end up with maybe sometimes even a worse outcome. That's why I think we should focus on cutting off the money supply chain for the cartels, and trying to do whatever we can to cut off their political power and influence. And then you'll see natural reform happen in countries like Venezuela.
Absolutely. I know the administration's putting a lot of focus on this, and I don't know if they clearly demonstrated as to why this is really in the average American's best interest. I know we've been moving a lot of different military assets to the area. I believe we have an aircraft carrier in the area. Then we've also seen the shooting of these drug boats that's gotten some of the administration in some hot water. I guess, what are our goals in Venezuela right now, and why?
You have a country that is really kind of a foothold for China and Russia, and they're doing a lot of illegal activity, a lot of criminal activity, and they've basically become a criminal state. And I get it. Like we can't continue to let that sit and fester, but I don't necessarily think that we have to go in with boots on the ground or a military conflict, because I do think regardless of what you do, you're not going to change the corruption that exists in Venezuela overnight. So I think that addressing the fact that money is that politics is being fueled by cartel money and drug money is something that we need to be working on in whatever way that we can, whether that's through sanctions, whether it's through cutting off their supply chain to the United States. Whatever it is that we can do, I think we should be working on.
Absolutely. What is your reaction to the current plan of attacking these alleged drug boats? And do you believe that Congress should have any role in approving these attacks before they're put out?
I would like to have a briefing to verify what form of intelligence that they have on each of these boats. But I mean, let's be real. These are not poor Venezuela fishermen in $500,000 speedboats, right? They're clearly drug runners, but I'm sure that our intelligence community has much more information on how they know who's on the boat, what the boat is, what the activity of the boat is. They probably know where the origin was, where it's going. I'm sure that there's a lot of information that makes them have a high level of confidence that they truly are drug runners.
Some of their actions outside of Venezuelan waters have allegedly gotten them in some trouble. So I'm referencing some recent Washington Post reporting about how a boat was struck and then, it was no longer a threat and then struck again. There are some Democrat senators who allege that this could potentially be a war crime if true. So I believe it was Senator Van Hollen from Connecticut and Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona who implied that if the Washington Post reporting was true, that this could potentially be a war crime. What do you think of that alleged reporting? And if the reporting is true, do you think that constitutes a war crime?
I don't know. I'd have to do the research on what would constitute a war crime. I fall back on, at the end of the day, show us your work, right? Congress needs to see the intelligence and the evidence that caused them to make those decisions.
I believe it was Senator Mark Kelly who was encouraging soldiers to not follow orders that they believe to be illegal or illegitimate. I don't remember his exact phrasing. Have you heard this stuff, and what's your reaction to that, and what do you think the downstream consequences for our soldiers who are being put into place where they need to make split-second decisions? Where does that leave them?
Yeah, I think that's really dangerous ground to kind of be sowing the seeds of sedition in our military. I think that Senator Kelly knows better, and I question his motives there. I think that was probably a foolish endeavor, and I bet you if you talk to those Democrats privately, they would probably all admit that they've made a mistake.
Absolutely. I wanted to shift gears a little bit to terrorism that we're seeing in our country. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. So I believe it was about a week ago, right before Thanksgiving, where we saw the 2 National Guardsmen outside D.C. get shot. One was murdered, one is in critical condition by an Afghan refugee. I just wanted to name both of the National Guardsmen very quickly. Sarah Beckstrom was the woman who was killed, only 20 years old, and I believe Andrew Wolf's in critical condition. He's 22. What's your reaction to this sort of terrorism on American soil? It seems as though people who are right-wing coded or our law enforcement are constantly being placed under threat. I know there are different threats towards ICE agents. We're coming off the heels of Charlie Kirk's very murder. That news of that was everywhere. So I don't know. How should Americans feel, and what's your reaction to this? This
is a really dangerous place. I mean, the fact that these fans are being flamed by people like Senator Kelly, and then that video, that only really emboldens some of this terrorist activity to continue. And I think that has to end. We need to be focused, and our intelligence community needs to be focused on identifying, because they know who came over. They weren't vetted, but they know a lot of them and who they are and where they are. And I think that we need to have a thorough process and prioritize. If you're going to be deporting people, try prioritizing the terrorists who hate this country, who got here without being vetted.
This Afghani American was allegedly actually a collaborator with American intelligence against the Taliban, and that I guess we felt like we owed them something and brought them over as a refugee. Do we have any obligation to collaborators who work with Americans and help make American service members' lives easier when we're fighting our wars abroad? I know this is a complicated issue.
I mean, look, these people, the CIA works with some very unsavourable people, some really nefarious people that we wouldn't necessarily want into our country. And so now what's not being said as well is, should we help them, or we're paying these people, right? Often these people are being paid by the intelligence, by the CIA, for the information and for the help. We in no way, shape, or form owe them the right to be in this country.
Absolutely. Or maybe even the right to move to a different country, but maybe not necessarily bring them over here.
Right.
But I did want to also get your reaction to what the president's response to this was, and it was generally to clamp down on immigration from so-called third world countries. And I think he said he wanted to pause all visas from Afghanistan in particular. In a Truth Social post, he said, "I will permanently pause migration from all third world countries to allow the U.S. system to fully recover. Only reverse migration can fully cure this situation." Do you agree with the president on that?
I think that we need to recognize that we have a lot of people that are coming here that cannot support themselves. And we are, as a nation, American people are having a hard time even paying their grocery bills. And we have an affordability crisis. We're not in a situation to be open arms to everybody at this point in time. If people need to come here and be vetted, and they need to be able to sustain themselves.
Absolutely. It seems as though many Americans, particularly in the MAGA base, are particularly concerned about immigration. And not even just illegal immigration, legal immigration, it seems as though is frustrating many within the MAGA base.
Right.
I also understand there's something like 700,000 H-1B visa holders here who are here legally, but that Americans still believe undercut American workers and, are still taking space here. What do you think about that in the party base?
Yeah. I think it's something that we have to address. And I looked into this, and one of the things that disturbs me is that a lot of visa holders, for example, are not required to pay FICA tax. You pay FICA, right?
Yes.
Would you like to stop paying FICA?
Yes.
I'd like to stop paying FICA because it's a crappy retirement plan, Social Security. But now, so an employer pays half of your FICA tax, but for these visa workers, they don't, right? Because now the argument is they're not going to get Social Security, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, they should be paying a tax that would make them at least financially the equivalent of a U.S. worker at the minimum. I worked in the IT space and saw entire teams laid off and replaced by H-1B visa holders, and that is not something that we want to see in America. I mean, I think that there's a place, an argument to say that there are certain places where there's no amount of work that you can do, there is no American worker that can meet those needs. But if that's the case, pay the taxes and let them benefit the nation as a whole.
Absolutely.
So I think that there's a place there where we could have that kind of conversation.
Do you think, so I guess what is your position on immigration, both illegal and legal? Are you a net zero immigration guy? I spoke to a representative earlier who said, I want negative immigration, re-immigration, so reverse immigration.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I don't want to cut off all immigration. I think people that want to come to this country that can provide value and truly adopt our society, we need to have that process. It should not be wide open. The doors should not be completely wide open, and we don't want to let our culture change rapidly. So we need to do it in a slow process. So I would be for reducing the number of people that are coming here legally, and certainly eliminating and zeroing out the people that are coming here illegally.
Absolutely. I know one of the president's biggest initiatives has been these mass deportations. Are you satisfied with the current state of these mass deportations in our country?
Look, you can always do more. I think we could always do more. And sadly, the left has been fighting us on this. And I was glad to see that the president gave a directive that, when people are throwing bricks and rocks and assaulting our, ICE agents or Homeland Security, arrest these people, right? We need to return to kind of a form of civility, and the fact that they're really willing to, take arms and fight against, law enforcement officials over this, protecting people that are here illegally. It's absurd.
I wanted to shift gears and quickly hit on one last topic, and it's a little bit of congressional politics. So one of the most important things in the One Big Beautiful Bill that barely passed here was that they tripled, I believe, the funding towards ICE, but there was one Republican who postured against it, Representative Thomas Massie, who the president was very upset with. There was also recently, I believe, a handful of Republicans who forced the vote on the so-called Jeffrey Epstein files, including Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie. They've drawn the ire of the president as a result of their actions here. What do you think about how all of that stuff played out, and how should we think of these Republicans when you guys do have such a slim majority in the House?
I have a lot of respect for Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I think that our party can't afford to be acting in a way where we're expelling people from the party. And they have a place, they have a highly intelligent position that most of the time I agree with. I mean, I'm very close ideologically with Thomas Massie, and I was a co-sponsor of the bill to release the Epstein files. I wasn't going to sign the discharge petition unless I saw that in the oversight process, which I'm on, the oversight committee, I saw if the administration was blocking information deliberately from the subpoenas that we were issuing, then to me that would be the last step, is to do the discharge petition. But I mean, I support the release of all of the Epstein information so long as it doesn't harm a victim.
I don't mean to cynically harp on this too much, but the president did call this a hoax and a huge distraction. And then also Representative Massie very cynically said, those who are voting against this, I believe he said, are protecting pedophiles. And he was making that accusation of most of the Republican caucus at the time. How should we think of that stuff?
Well, ultimately, nearly every person voted for it when it came to the vote. Whenever I had opportunities and oversight to vote to subpoena the files, subpoena the Epstein estate, I voted for those, and have been a part of that process. And so I think most all Republicans were supportive of releasing the files, and really a lot of us were really kind of puzzled with some of Trump's rhetoric. The only explanation I've been given that makes sense is that Trump has gone down this road with disclosure of other things like the JFK files, the RFK files, and really has discovered that it's one thing to say it and another thing to deliver it when you have an intelligence community that's fighting you tooth and nail, right? And so you can say if you're Trump, I can try to release the files, but at the end of the day, the American people, there's always going to be more that needs to be released, and the American people will always suspect something.
Absolutely. This will be my last follow-up here because I feel like it's extremely pertinent. As a result of her posturing, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she drew the ire of the president. He said he would endorse a primary opponent, and she ended up actually stepping down, as I understand, largely as a result of this. This leaves the House of Republicans with an even slimmer majority. She's not serving out her term. It feels like a middle finger to Mike Johnson and the Republican voters who put her in office. What do you think about her resigning and leaving Republicans in an even more vulnerable position? And this is, of course, coming off the heels of the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, which the president already thought put him in the compromising position.
Look, I mean, serving in this role, a lot of times people don't. It's not exactly a glamorous role. You make a lot of sacrifices, and I can't really judge Marjorie for making that decision. She knows what's best for her family. I'm certain that her district is going to elect someone that is as conservative as Marjorie. And so I think that at the end of the day, I'm not here to judge my colleagues and their actions.
Absolutely. Representative, thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate it, and I hope to bring you on Timcast IRL soon.
That would be great.
Thank you so much for your time, Representative. Thank you, guys.